Hello and welcome to my tutorial on setting up an interior vis area inside Cryengine 3 and then using the solids tool to create walls, as well as lighting a simple scene inside Cryengine that can give us results like this, using a 3-point lighting system and messing with the materials. The goal of this tutorial really isn't to make an amazing level. As you can see, this is pretty much the most awful looking thing you'll ever look at. I know the ceiling is red, but that's just because I was so sick of everything being gray. But we're going to go through some just basic entities, as well as adding a particle effect, adding this little tractor, setting up a 3-point lighting system. It may not be the best, but it's a good place to start, as well as editing some of these materials, using the solids tool to create these materials. This will not be in there, that's a asset I made. And troubleshooting some light issues that you get when you spawn lights inside Cryengine 3, and learning how to deal with them. And we're also going to learn about freezing and unfreezing objects and why it's useful when you set up a vis area, and setting up a flat terrain outside, and freezing our skybox, and also messing with the time of day. This will allow us to set up our lighting of our indoor scene and have no issues. And it should give you a fairly good place to start. It's not meant to be, like some amazing tutorial, but it gives you the basics of understanding how to set up an indoor scene. And hopefully, this is something that a lot of people were requesting, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. And let's get right into it. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new level. So we're going to go new. We'll name this Indoors. Press OK. We're not going to save this level. Give it a second. Oh, wait. Alright. Don't want to associate that with anything. And Cryengine is being difficult. I'm going to pause it and resume it when it's done. Cryengine 3 crashed on me, as it loves to do, so we're going to make that new level again, or at least I will. And we're going to name it whatever we feel like. Hopefully I'm easy to hear today. In the last tutorial I was not, so I'm hoping I have that figured out. So now we have our basic level. We're just going to set up a simple flat terrain really quick, because that's just easier to place objects and stuff. At least our vis area, and just makes life easy. So we're going to click Terrain, Edit Terrain. We're going to scroll out here just using our mouse wheel and right clicking to move this around. We're going to change our inside radius with this flatten selected, and we're going to change the hardness to 1, and we're going to pick a height of 55 feet and just paint a flat terrain all across the map. Once you have that done, your map will be completely flat. As you can see here. Next we're going to add what is called a vis area, and it allows us to create an area that is not affected by sunlight at all. So let's just go to Area, Vis Area. Make sure that you have this Follow Terrain and Snap to Object selected, or at least the Follow Terrain. We're going to click and drag these points. Make sure that you have your helpers visible. I didn't when I started clicking and dragging. You can enable them by pressing Shift Space. So make sure that's enabled. Just make a fairly large area. Double click once you have all 4 points. Chances are it won't really be shaped like a square. So go to Edit Shape. When you click that, use Transform Gizmo. Click on this little guy right here, or whatever you did wrong, and try to make it close to a rectangular prism as possible. And we're going to do height of 12, 15. Now we got ourselves a nice square. Okay, now with that done, we're going to start drawing the floor. It's much easier just to do it outside of our vis area. So we're just going to make sure we have this selected again. Make it bigger than the vis area. Drag it up about, I don't know, a foot there. click. If you go inside, you can see now that we have our floor all done. So let's press 1 on our keyboard with this solid selected. And we are going to Control C on the Z axis, drag and click that up, and now we have a top and a bottom. Let's just finish that off and draw in, or at least use the solid tool to make a few walls. So we're going to, delete that. Make sure you have that selected again. Make a thin wall. Click and drag up. Then we'll have a wall there. Make sure you have your wall selected. Hold down the x-axis, Control C. Control C. Press 2 on your keyboard to rotate it. Try to get it to 90 degrees. I mean, at this point it doesn't matter, really. We're just trying to eyeball it. Get it in there. If it shows outside of your area, that means it's not going to be visible inside of your vis area. Then again, Control C. Now we have 4 walls. If it's not at 90 degrees, you can just fix that really quick. So you can see in here. Got it fixed there. So now we have a little interior space. And then we're going to section this off. So let's go to our solid tool again. Make sure this time it has to be set to follow train snap to objects. That way it's on top of your solid tool, or your solids. Make some thin walls. Drag up, double click. 1. You can see here though that these walls are not very they're not very wide, and we want it to be a little bit larger than that. So what we're going to do is go over here to editing mode with our solid selected. Click face, select the face, and drag it out. If you're used to 3ds Max, this is pretty simple for you. When you're done, just press escape. Then Control C again. And we want to put let's move these walls back. Whoops. Then we're going to Control C on both axes. Delete this one. I just want this one. We're going to put a little break here. So now we've got our little sectioned off room. For whatever reason, my Cryengine stutters, and I'm getting 170 FPS, so I have no idea what's going on, but this happens to me a lot. I think this is a little bit tall, so let's just select all of these by control clicking. At least if you want to, you can. I want to. And we're just going to press 3 on our keyboard and scale these by view. So if you scale it locally, it doesn't do it right. So now everything's a little bit smaller. Still not small enough, but it'll work. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some materials. So let's select all of our walls, because we want all of our walls to have the same materials as they are just walls. And this is a simple tutorial. And then we're going to go over here to our material editor, which you can select up here, and go to if all of your textures probably won't load right away. If they don't, just click this and then re-click all materials, and you'll have all your materials. So we're going to go to concrete, and then let's just let's take a look. So right-click, assign to selection. You're probably not going to be able to see these, so you know what? Let's right away. Let's just go ahead and add a light. So before we select our material, let's add a light, so we can at least get a preview of what our material should look like. So go over here to Entity, Lights, Light. If you followed my other tutorials, especially the introduction to Cryengine and making a level, this shouldn't be anything new. And let's just drag and drop it into our frame. Depending on how you dragged and drop it, if you're using this one, follow train and snap to objects, it'll spawn on the floor like this. So just drag it out, put it in the middle, and turn up that radius really high so we can just preview everything. Just drag it up to about 50 meters. So now we're going to get back to making our material. So get your material editor back in with all of these selected. We're just going to have to reselect these. Just drag this out of the way. There are other ways to do this as well. You know, you can use selection sets kind of like in 3ds Max. So we can call these walls. And then now we can just select it. So let's say we wanted to not select it. Select it. Now your walls are selected. Makes life easier. If you're custom to 3ds Max, which I'm hoping you are if you're doing this tutorial, that's no big deal. So now we can assign a different texture. So let's try, just see what we like. Look for something that's just a prime candidate. I think we're going to use this wall 01. No, we're not. We're going to use the wall 03. So with wall 03, our concrete wall 03 selected and all of our walls, let's just double check. We're going to go around and mess with some of the settings. So let's first of all, let's make it a little bit warmer. You know, I don't like it when it's all cold and stupid like this. So then what we're going to do is just add that warmth to it by changing the diffuse color a little bit with this selected. Make it a little bit grayer. Let's change that specular, make it even more yellowy. I mean, obviously, a lot of these things you wouldn't want to have on a regular level. And we're going to change our glossiness to about 108. And make our specular about 2.7. Then if you scroll down or go to the side, depending on how wide you have it, we can change our Fresnel settings, or Fresnel settings, rather. We can turn up that scale. And obviously, it looks extremely weird. I mean, the walls are reflective at this point, but I just don't want the scene to look totally dead and lifeless. I mean, I'd never do something this ridiculous inside of a real level, but for this case it'll work. So now select the floor, and let's go back to our material editor. Let's do concrete wall 01 for our floor. With this selected, we can see it's super dark. Over here, where it's next to the light source, is probably the best example, but it's still too dark. So let's just brighten this up. Make it a little bit warmer, because again, we want a kind of warm scene. But let's actually, you know, in this case, let's make it kind of cold, just half cold to break it up a little bit, because everything's too one feel. Just looks kind of odd, and it tends to just kind of mess with your head, make things look really stupid. We can add some more yellow to that. Nice gloss. Make it totally reflective. No. We do want it slightly reflective. In DirectX 11, anything above 50 will make it totally reflective, unless you specify to have it not do that. We're going to add a texture to the ceiling. Let's make this concrete A2. Let's make this a nice red color, which is totally ridiculous, like this tutorial is. But I don't want it to be too boring. I mean, I kind of feel like a little kid who just discovered crayons at this point. Let's just turn up the let's turn down the tiling effect on here a little bit. It's just a little bit it's just very in your face. I mean, this whole scene, except for the ceiling, is just in your face tiling. So, one cool thing to note is that if you select a material, as soon as you select it, anything that's using that material will glow. So we can see we're using concrete wall 03. Let's go over here to our diffuse, and under diffuse, use a little arrow, turn the tiling down. We can turn our tiling to 0. Just turn to 0. Call that good for now. It's a little bit better. Not the best. Actually, I don't even know if it looks any different. Okay, now we're going to actually light our scene because our scene is not correctly lit at all. So it's totally dark. Let's go ahead back to our entities and re-add that light. We're going to add 2 main lights in here. One here. Try to have one on each side. Control C, make another one. Actually, you know what? Let's delete that. We're going to want to change the radius and change a few of these settings in here. So let's turn the radius up to about 16. Let's go over here to options. Now what we're going to do is we're going to learn about shadows and coming up with fixing some of the issues that these come with. As you can see right here, as soon as we turned on the cast shadows to very high, or just any shadow setting really, it creates this really irritating artifact right here. And I was actually struggling with it up until I was decided to make this tutorial, so I went and figured out how to fix it and a few of the ways we can go around it and some other shadow issues that we're going to learn about along the way. So we can see our shadow bias is set to 100. This is the way that we're going to get rid of that. Just crank it up to about 400. And as you can see, boom, it's no longer there, except for over here a little bit. But the reason or a cheap way to get around that is to, let's click this solid right here. Turn off cast shadows. It no longer casts any shadows, which can be an issue for some pieces of geometry. As you can see, it's a cheap way to fix this issue, and it will help you down the road, and I found it to be a very helpful tool. So now we can set up the lighting and the colors for this light. We just go over here to color, diffuse. Let's make this a kind of a blue, just because I made it too warm. Turn up that HDR. Now one of the cool things about HDR lighting, besides the fact this is totally blown out, but the cool thing about it is that there's eye adaptation that has to happen. So let me just quickly demonstrate this. You don't have to do this. So if I set up a light here, I look over here at this light. This room's really bright. My eyes will warm up and adapt. So that's another thing you can do, if you want to set up an effect like that. There's the Cryengine 3 lighting tools are very, very powerful, and they don't require light mapping like UDK does, which is very nice. So let's just turn down that HDR multiplier. Let's turn it to 0.2. Then we can change our diffuse, turn it up a little bit, but in our case we actually want to keep it at about 1.2. Our specular multiplier, we can turn that to about 1.7. And the specular multiplier is, if you don't know much about texturing or you've never made your own assets, you probably don't know what that really is, but you can see that, watch this, as I turn this up, the specular map, which is what tells the engine what parts of the texture are going to be the brightest, basically is the best way to describe it. Well, this just makes those parts brighter or darker. So usually having a value of about, 20 looks good on the floor, but the rest of it just looks stupid that way. So that leads me to the conclusion that I'm going to reselect my walls. And I don't want to seem like I didn't prepare this tutorial, which I did. I feel like my first attempt was much nicer. Let's take some of the contrast out of these walls, and then we're gonna turn down this yellow specular a little bit and make it kind of a, I guess a earthy, orangey, or not orange, just yellowy green, like an olive drab, I guess. Make the glossiness a little bit lower, about 15. That looks good. That looks a lot nicer. And that ceiling, I just don't like it either. So we're gonna turn down that. Let's turn that specular, lighten it up just a little bit. Let's make it. Should make that a pinkish color, and that already looks a lot better in my opinion. Even though that's not really supposed to look that great, and it doesn't. Let's copy and clone these lights. Have two light sources. I think it's a little bit overexposed, so let's turn these each to 0.7. So now we've got a very simple setup here. I mean, obviously there's no real light sources, it's just all emitting. And, you know, I'm going to probably cover, I have a tutorial that's a lot more comprehensive about lights, but in the meantime this will do. So we're going to make sure these are casting shadows. Actually, in this case, since they're so far away, it really doesn't matter. They're just more like fill lights, which in this case is going to make that not really important. You can also change the settings for things simultaneously, so if I want to add shadows to both of them, or neither of them, or take the shadows off altogether. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to add a third light right here. Same kind of thing, but we want to turn down this radius a little bit, make it less prominent. I actually want to kind of make this a different color. We want to make this much, much warmer than the others. I want to make this an orangey color, just to bring some life to this room, or this part of the room. As you can see, you know, that really helped just bring out this part of it, and it made it look a little bit more exciting. Because it was looking very flat. I mean, this is an incredibly flat scene. We're actually going to have to make this darker as well, without lighting, because you can see that it's just way too bright. I mean, if there's no sunlight affecting this room, this place should be dark. So let's go ahead and do that right now and just get that out of the way. So what we're going to do is select our visarea, and I'm going to quickly talk about some of the issues or some of the settings in here. We can do things like ignore sky color, which will ignore the sky color as it says, which you can set in your time of day. Ignore GI or global illumination, but we don't want to do that right now. We can do ocean is visible, which if you don't want to get disoriented, it can be kind of nice. We're just going to leave that checked for now just because I feel like it. But one of the important ones is the ambient color. This is the color without anything going, without any sunlight. So as you can see, the lighting is much, much more important for lighting your scene. So just turn that down. Actually, let's tweak this wall, or the ceiling, because we're getting a lot of issues over here with it just being frustrating and how it lights. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our lights a little bit, and we're going to up the radius. About 20. That corner's still kind of dark, but that's okay. So now we've got a very simple setup right here, and let's quickly talk about shadows, which is going to be very important. So let's go into our other room that we've made. I feel like this should be a little bit darker. Quite a bit darker, actually. So let's talk about shadows. So let's add a quick light. Nothing done to it. Just make sure it's inside your scene. Let's turn down that radius. Actually, you know, that radius is okay for now. Now let's quickly go to geometric entities over here in the objects panel. Objects. We're going to go to props. Industrial. Actually, no, we're going to go to vehicles. That was it. Tractor. We're going to drag this over here into our scene. Press 2, rotate it. Set a nice little angle there. And before we get into lighting this and doing the 3-point lighting setup that a lot of people were requesting of me to make a tutorial for, let's just talk about shadows and how to fix shadow issues and artifacts. So we're going to go over here to cast shadows, turn it to very high spec, which is the most demanding part. Now as you can see, we're still getting that lighting issue we had before. You know, or these shadow tiles, I guess you could call them. I don't know, that's what it looks like to me. So what we're going to do, again, turn our shadow bias up. This time it wants about 800 to look good. And what we're going to do is, let me see if it's still doing this thing. Yep, as you can see, if I turn down my movement speed a little bit, this shadow actually isn't lining up with the object, which is a very common issue and quite an irritating thing that happens when you're working with Cryengine, actually. So let me bring up a few threads here from CryDev, which is your go-to place if you're having issues, and actually where I learned a few ways to solve some of these issues. What we're going to want to do is open up this thread, the sun clipping thread, where you can see here that this guy is having issues with just a moment. He's having issues with his static meshes lining up with the lighting or the shadows that are cast by the sun. So what we do is we're going to go to copy E clip range, and one thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to link this into the description so that way you can just go straight to this thread, and I'm also going to have all of my commands in the thread as well. I believe I'm going to be using 2. So we're going to want to go into our editor. We can either press Ctrl G to begin playing as a character, press this the title key next to the one key on your keyboard to open the console. With the command copied, press Ctrl C or Ctrl V to copy it in, put a space, and 90. And then this should have resolved our issue. If it doesn't, yeah, we're going to want to probably do it from within the editor. I believe that's how I did it last time. Okay, so it turns out actually that I had this in my system folder, so this automatically ran. But this is actually a very common issue, and you will probably have it. So the console command is E sun clip plane range equals 90. And I'm going to have that linked in the description so you can type that in. And it should allow these shadows to sync up, which often doesn't happen. With that said, let's add a light in this hallway right here. And we're going to talk a little bit more about fixing some of those shadow options. I'm sorry this tutorial may not be all that you dreamed it to be, but I'm trying to do a good job. Let's make it cast shadows. And as you can see, we're getting this again. So now we need to think, do we want this to cast shadows? As you can see, it is right now. Maybe you want it to. You know, maybe you want to do that. It's pretty important, right? So we turn up this again. But as you'll see, there'll be some separation here, which is one issue that I'm still trying to work on to make it work perfectly. And a lot of people struggle with this. So, and I found the issue for it. And so right now I'm searching through the Cryengine free SDK information list, or sorry, it's late, but the Cryengine 3 documentation, and it's got a list of every single console command. This issue is definitely an issue that has been observed by many people, and even the official CryDev forum people who work for CryDev have yet to come up with a really good solution to this. And it's quite a messy business, but You know, you can get around it by lots of things. You might just have to play around with it, but what I was trying to get at is that, you know, you can remove a lot of these issues, but you might also have to sacrifice casting shadows on some things to get around them. I mean, it really comes down to what's important to you and what's important to your visual looks and how you want to go about these things. But it can cause a lot of issues. I mean, would you rather have the shadows not align, or would you rather have it go through the wall? So it's kind of a frustrating scenario it puts you in. And you just kind of have to decide what's really important. So now that I've gone over that, let's actually just get into the 3-point lighting thing. I don't want to bore you with technical things. You'll also be able to use Crydev, and you should be able to find out a lot of things on your own. And I mean, that's really the most important thing about doing tutorials, is understanding kind of the basics and concepts of stuff. And what will really get you to learn is to troubleshoot and experiment and have these kind of issues yourself, you know. Trying to figure them out and be creative about it. That's the most important thing about learning 3D, or just really anything, is how creatively you can solve issues. Because if you're not a creative problem solver, well, I've got news for you. You're not going to go too far. So what we're just doing here is we're copying and cloning lights. We want a standard 3-point lighting setup, so we want one up here. We're going to have this be our fill light, or a backlight, and then this will be our fill light. I'm actually not a pro at setting up lighting, but I'm going to do my best because that was what people wanted when I asked for what they wanted in this tutorial. So let's make this a little bit warmer under the diffuse. Turn up the specular multiplier to kind of take some of the flatness out of the object, but we don't want it to be too intense. Let's kind of get a little angle going so we can light for it, or get that look that we want from this specific point of view. I'm going to turn up the HDR dynamic. It brings out some excitement to it. It may not look entirely realistic, but it makes things a little more exciting, and that's really what this is all about. You kind of want to, just experiment and see what looks good. A very common effect is to kind of have two clashing, not necessarily clashing, but to use warms and cools to define things, just like you would use in drawing. You'd use darks and lights, or shadows and highlights to define a shape. And in that way you can kind of do the same with lighting. But I'm no lighting expert, but that's just what I would do. So right now I'm just kind of trying to make the scene a little more exciting. Gonna cast some shadows with it on these objects. I'm not going to use that because this is my fill light, or this is my backlight. My fill light I might cast a shadow on, but I prefer to have it going away. If you have to think about the composition of the lighting. If I were to have a, my composition is pointing very in this direction, and if my shadows go that way, it just helps with the composition. Whereas if I had a shadow coming backwards at the player, it would just, I don't know, it feels like it would seem a little bit odd to me. So I'm just gonna keep my shadows pointing that direction. I'm gonna lower this. Actually, I'm gonna make a copy of this light and use it to cast some shadows. I want to turn it down because I don't want it to just compound and then it would seem like there's two really bright lights. Maybe add some variation in there. Make that yellow. Turn up the specular multiplier just a slight amount. Sorry, not yellow. I don't even know my colors, but that's okay. And you can kind of add, you can just add a slight amount of a blue in there. And then we're going to tweak our warm light, our warm frontal light. Just tweak that a bit. Make it a little bit warmer by turning down the specular. Now, just like our other scene, I kind of want to make the floor a little bit shinier, even though it's not realistic in any way, shape, or form. I just kind of like that look. So we're going to drag this glossiness up, turn up the specular level, turn the Fresnel. We're going to make that about the Fresnel scale. We're going to make that about 21 or 24. As you can see, things are getting a little bit odd looking, but I don't know. Just for this specific scene, I feel it adds a little bit more excitement. So now we have that done. We're going to go on to this roof. So go to concrete or concrete A2 under walls, and we're going to make this an orange color. We're going to make our floor a much more gray color. We're going to make the walls. We're going to make them orange as well. And we have to adjust the specular. Now the reason I'm changing everything I just set up is that because I was just trying to go over some of the basics, and now I want to go up to setting up a scene that looks somewhat decent. So we're going to make this orange. If you don't like orange, I'm sorry. I like the color orange in decent amounts. Still feel like the floor looks a little bit strange. So I'm going to just play with the diffuse a little bit. Make that a little bit more gray. Slight tint of green. I mean, as you can see, this looks a little, it looks pretty weird, but sure as hell is exciting. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to mess with our time of day, which is really important. Even though, you know, we're not outside, our time of day still has a lot of really important settings that we can utilize. So let's go ahead and turn our play speed to 0, because if you don't, just try pressing Control G and going in your scene. You'll notice some weird things happening, not at this moment, but you will. You'll see some haze or some fog come in and some strange stuff, and it'll just cycle. And that's the time of day cycling outside rapidly. Force the sky from updating. So the next thing we're going to do is, I wish I could show you this on 2 monitors, but I'll have to make do with what I have. We don't need this middle section, so let's just kind of minimize it like this. Use this little slider, and we'll set our time of day to about, I think I had mine set to 5 o'clock. Set to about 1 o'clock here. 1 or 2, 1:30. And you can see we have a lot of settings here. I mean, this is the time of day, and time of days are a whole nother beast that can take quite a bit of time up to make. But we also have our HDR settings here. So let's go ahead and let's just change the white balance. If you're familiar with anything in photography, you should be familiar with this sort of thing. Basically, we're changing the white balance, but in this case it has many more colors than warm and cool. We can just kind of tailor it a little bit how we want it. We want it to be slightly warmer because we're going to add a filter over it. So let's go over here to our parameters. And let's go down to the bottom under filters, photo color. We're going to turn up the density to 1. Make this as you can see, we can get some pretty interesting results. I'm going to turn our photo filter down now that we have a color we like. Let's turn it to 0.81 or 0.18. And then we're going to add some blur. So let's turn the blur amount to 1. Let's then add this to 5 meters. As you can see now, everything past 5 meters is blurred, even part of the tractor. And then we can adjust our saturation levels. We don't want it to be too high. 0.65 works for this scene. Contrast. Personally, I think this 0.89 looks kind of nice. We can change our film curve. Something that's really important is to make sure that you have this start recording on. This basically saves all of your settings as you do it. If you uncheck it, save settings, and then change another setting, it'll stop doing it, and everything you just did will be lost in. I've had to learn that the hard way. And it can be a pain. You can spend a lot of time on these things, and then if you waste even more time with something like that, it's just very frustrating. So right now what we're doing is we're changing our midtones, our highlights, and our shadows. It's just something we like. As well as our white point. Just getting something we like. We don't want it to be, we want it to be kind of subtle, but at the same time slightly exciting. There's things like gamma you can play with. In this case, we're going to put it to 0.1 or 1.1. We can change our brightness and our contrast here as well. You never want it to be too saturated. It can just look like some sort of crayon creation gone wrong. So back in our editor, let's turn down this highlight right here. It's a little bit too much. It's a little bit too harsh right now. Actually, kind of like what it does to the rest of the models, but yeah, let's take this guy then. Put that HDR at 0. Maybe that'll do something, but it doesn't look like it. So at this point, you know, we can see we've kind of got a scene together. If we press space shift, we can see how that's looking. That wall is irritating me, so I'm just going to delete it. As well as that wall. And then now we've got our final product. You know what? Before we call this quits, I'm going to resolve that because that is very frustrating. And I don't like that at all. What we're going to do, we're going to try and copy this out. You know what? That's not working. I'm going to go and take this light. Just turn down the specular multiply. That's the wrong light. Forgive me if I'm not the most coherent today. It's very early. It's about 3 a.m. here. We're just gonna directly edit the source. That should work. I just kind of liked some of the benefits the HDR gave me. If we delete some of these extra lights that I don't even know how I placed them here. Actually, that one was really important. There we go. And then we can turn the HDR back up here. And that should work a little bit better. So now if you press shift space, we can get some of our final result. Just find a camera angle you like. It's not the best scene, but it'll go. It'll work. And then I just want to make this probably about 4. No, let's keep this at 5. make some last minute tweaks. Kind of feel like there should be a little bit more blue and a little bit more of a battle between the two colors. But hey, I'm not a lighting expert. Well, I think I can call this scene good, so we've learned quite a bit, including how to make the rest of our scene look like... I don't even have words. But, we've learned how to set up a 3-point lighting system, how to make a somewhat strange but useful scene, and how to go over and set up a vis area as well as some solids and apply materials and tweak those materials to get the looks you want and use some lights. I would like it if you would subscribe to my channel and you would favorite this video and share it with all your friends and click the like button or thumbs up it or whatever it is on YouTube and request more tutorials and tell me how I could have improved. I apologize if this wasn't the best tutorial. Please give me suggestions and feedback. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, enjoy.